Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The more you flip through the words of Inspector General Michael Horowitz in his voluminous report about the shameful conduct of the FBI in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation of the Trump presidential campaign, the more you hear echoes of former FBI Director James Comey and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And of course, Comey is at the center of both of those scandals. Both this IG report and Comey's 2016 announcement that Hillary should not be indicted over her email scandal presented a litany of abuses and misdemeanors, crimes even, that shocked the senses. And in both cases, the subjective conclusions were opposite to the objective facts. This transparent dualism by Washington insiders, a detailing of abuses followed by exoneration, should lead us to ask if we all feel better now that Horowitz has concluded, quote, "We did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the FBI's decision to seek FISA authority to spy on Carter Page." Really? What that probably means, translating Washington speak, is that none of the 100 or so witnesses that Horowitz interviewed admitted their bias. You think? But this conclusion that there was no bias begs the immediate question, maybe the only question we really need to ask: why every single one of the 17 serious errors or omissions referred to as performance failures committed by the FBI and listed in the IG report cut in one direction: keeping alive the justification for a FISA warrant to spy on an enemy's campaign at any expense. If this was merely gross incompetence, those errors would have occurred in both directions. But they didn't. Beyond that, how would professionals in the world's most prestigious law enforcement agency believe that Carter Page, a minor and meek Trump campaign official, was in league with nefarious Russians in a plot to rig the 2016 election? Better scripts have been rejected by Hollywood. Why would high-ranking FBI officials deliberately and repeatedly exclude information from their FISA applications that would have certified just how unreliable the infamous and long-discredited Steele dossier was, especially as the only justification for spying on the campaign of their political enemy? Why would such extraordinary efforts be undertaken to protect the sanctity of a dossier that was laughed off and rejected, even by elite media hardly given to protecting the president? How could an investigation headed by FBI agent Peter Strzok, who authored those infamous text exchanges with his paramour Lisa Page, an FBI lawyer promising an insurance policy against Trump's election, not be considered biased? How's that possible? In another of her messages, Lisa Page asks, "Trump's not ever going to become president, right?" And Strzok replies, No, he won't. We'll stop it." And for good measure, Strzok expressed his contempt for Trump voters, writing that "I could smell the Trump support at a Walmart." Now, one thing people seem unaware of was that the first application for a FISA warrant was rejected, and that it was only after they then submitted the Steele dossier that the warrant was granted. And then the same information which Comey and company knew was corrupted was used to get 3 FISA renewals. Most of all, though, how in the world could Horowitz possibly conclude that the investigation was untainted by political bias when in the same report he writes the following, and this is just a small smattering. This is from the report. "The Crossfire Hurricane team failed to inform department officials of significant information that was available to the team at the time that the FISA applications were drafted and filed. Much of that information was inconsistent with or undercut the assertions contained in the FISA applications that were used to support probable cause." than this. FBI personnel fell far short of the requirement in FBI policy that they ensure that all factual statements in a FISA application are scrupulously accurate. We identified multiple instances in which factual assertions relied upon in the first FISA application were inaccurate, incomplete, or unsupported by appropriate documentation based upon information the FBI had in its possession at the time the application was filed. And just one more here. Officials accepted the FBI's decision to move forward with the application based substantially on the Steele information. Now, incredibly, breathtakingly even, after this report, which is a wholesale indictment of his leadership at the FBI, James Comey went on MSNBC and claimed that he was exonerated.
It was all made up. 2 years of sitting silently at the FBI while you're lied about. And finally, the truth is out. It was lies. There was no treason. There was no conspiracy. There was no tapping of Trump's wires. There was no putting informants in the campaign. It was all nonsense. And the FBI finally has its day with the American people, and I hope they pay attention to it.
I mean, that's just a wow. That anyone, least of all Comey, could read that report and claim exoneration is literally out of touch with reality. Any self-respecting person who could look at that assessment of his body of work would try to walk away and lose himself for a while. But, like Jussie Smollett, Comey seems delusional to the point of having convinced himself of a pure self-aggrandizing fantasy. So when Michael Horowitz appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham followed up on the remarks of the disgraced former FBI director.
Former FBI Director James Comey said this week that your report vindicates him. Is that a fair assessment of your report?
I think the activities we found here don't vindicate anybody who touched this.
Just based on what we know from this report, and before we even get wind of what Barr and his lead investigator John Durham uncover and who they indict, you can bet that most of the people in this report, most of them, if not all of them, will be fired at best, indicted at worst. Comey is Exhibit A of a corrupt and fast-crumbling swamp elite, more exposed with each passing day. And as we talked about in the first segment, the Attorney General and his lead investigator are hard at work on a broader investigation, which will represent the final word on this whole frightening, years-long episode of an incumbent administration conducting surveillance against its political enemies. At the same time, they try to impeach Trump for foreign interference. Where I come from, that's called raw, unmitigated chutzpah. Point is, both Comey and Horowitz are products of the Washington bubble, where the swamp inhabitants have been unmasked for the extraordinary measures they've taken to weaken or remove a president they view almost universally as a mortal threat to their livelihood. And now, the Justice Department Inspector General, like the dearly departed former FBI director, has demonstrated that his endgame is to preserve the status quo. Because if Horowitz had reached the only logical conclusion based on the facts in his report, his Justice Department would likely face an unimagined day of reckoning. Cognitive dissonance, attempting to reconcile clashing narratives, is the operative expression in this swamp so badly in need of draining. Or maybe the word is gaslighting, making people think they're crazy for believing what they know to be true. Here's the only question worth asking at this point. If the facts presented in your own report do not constitute political bias, Mr. Horowitz, please tell us exactly what would. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss a major scandal that may be worse than impeachment and spying on the Trump campaign.